Okay. Welcome back to Auto 101 and gasket removal. We're back removing more gaskets on my 455 cubic inch V8 engine. As you can see from the last video, I've flipped the motor around on its engine stand, so now the oil pan is facing up, the block is facing down, and what we're going to do for this session is remove 4 different gaskets. The first and largest will be the oil pan gasket. Again, this is the oil pan. There's a gasket that runs along the rail here on the opposite side, and there are 2 neoprene gaskets on either end. Secondly, we'll remove the fuel pump gasket. This is the fuel pump. Thirdly, we will remove the oil adapter gasket, which goes between the oil adapter and the engine block. And finally, we will remove the water pump. Again, in terms of gaskets that I have replaced in the past, the oil pan gasket I replaced when I replaced the timing chain on this motor. I replaced the timing chain at approximately 125,000 miles. This motor now has 326,000 miles on it, so this gasket right here has approximately 200,000 miles on it. I have also replaced this fuel pump gasket in the past, although I can't recall when, but it probably is at least 100 to 150,000 miles old. Water pump, like clockwork, I have replaced this water pump and hence replaced the gasket about every 80,000 miles. And finally, the oil adapter gasket I have never replaced, and given the ownership, the chain of ownership since I got this car, I am 100% convinced that this gasket here is OEM, just like the head gaskets were that we removed the last time. And on that note, I did want to make one correction. This head gasket that I pulled off, and as you can see it's still in one piece, I thought when I pulled it off that it was the asbestos sandwich type where you had metal on the outside and asbestos in the center. As it turned out, upon closer inspection, this is a 100% metal gasket. It's embossed steel, very much like the gasket for the intake manifold. 100% embossed steel. There is no asbestos gasketing material whatsoever. So, in any event, what that tells me is, at least in 1970, I don't know of any other year, but in 1970, GM on their newly built engine blocks were installing stamped steel head gaskets. So there you go. Learn something new every day. Let's move on to the oil pan. Once again, I'm going to make a lot of noise. Once again, it is so much easier when you have the benefit of an air wrench. Let's do the other side. And again, Jim, if you have any questions while I'm doing this, please feel free to chime in.
Okay.
These were 3/8 inch bolts, but the oil pan also has 4 1/2 or 9/16 inch bolts. So I have to switch 1/2 inch. Jim, if you can tell me where I dropped that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Right down below you. There it is.
Yeah, thank you. It's always a good thing to check and see to make sure you got all the bolts up. Here's what I have. Okay, again, this is the oil pan. Fairly clean. I don't know if the camera can distinguish too greatly. But anyway, again, always a good idea to change your oil every 3,000 miles. I don't care what the owner's manual tells you. Just set that aside. Get my trusty gasket removing knife. You see part of the gasket is broken off. Again, not to worry about, since these are neoprene gaskets. And part of the gasket is broken off right here. Just get the knife underneath. And this gasket, unlike all the other ones, is probably going to be difficult. But again, it's neoprene. It's heavily worn. Actually, speaking of neoprene, the two end gaskets are also made of neoprene. Let's see if they come out. As best we can.
So you are scraping the gasket off, correct?
Correct.
All right.
And I'm endeavoring to get the gasket material to land outside the edge block as opposed to the inside the edge block. Doesn't always happen, but I'm going to be pulling this apart anyway and cleaning everything up before it goes back in the car.
And do you have any concerns about scoring the metal surface with a knife?
Not with the knife.
Okay.
Again, I know some use wire brushes to clean the surface. That's fine. Some use wire brushes connected to some sort of motorized device.
Yep.
And again, so long as the wire is softer than the metal, you're okay. If it's a hard steel wire brush, you could actually ruin the sealing surface, and whatever new gasket you put on won't do the job. And by the way, what you're looking at, this is the crankshaft. These are the rods to which are connected the pistons. This is the oil pump. Actually, this was so greasy and oily. I was thinking this is a neoprene gasket. It's a paper gasket.
Were these gaskets for the oil pan ever made of asbestos?
Not that
To your
I'm
knowledge.
aware.
Okay.
You'll get people telling you that every engine gasket is made of asbestos. But again, as far as I'm aware, only tailpipe, exhaust manifold, head gaskets, and some intake manifold gaskets are made of asbestos. And typically, the intake manifolds that are made of asbestos are on inline 6-cylinder engines where you have an intake port, exhaust port, intake port, exhaust port, all in line, and so the gasketing material is essentially the same as that for an exhaust gasket, where you've got embossed metal on one side and asbestos gasketing material on the other side. But again, this engine is typical of most V8s that I have seen, where on a V8 engine, the intake manifold is made of embossed metal. Sometimes when hot rodders replace their intake manifold with an aftermarket one, perhaps some people listening to this tape have heard of Edelbrock, which makes aftermarket intake manifolds out of aluminum as opposed to cast iron. Oftentimes, the gasket that you will use to mate the aluminum to the cast iron will also be made of asbestos, or potentially just compressed paper, what I'm dealing with right now. Vegetable fiber. That's where the name vellum comes from, by the way. You probably, many of you have heard of velluloid or velumoid. Seems to get pronounced differently every time someone says it. But the vellum gaskets are the vegetable fiber.
I always think of medieval paper.
Oh, very good.
So you could also do this with like a box cutter, the gasket scrape, the other gasket scraper you had too, right? From the last time?
Yeah, I mean, I use my razor scraper.
Okay.
But I could use that.
Okay.
I'm in the way of the camera.
So,
But
6 of one, half dozen of the other.
6 of one, half dozen of the other. And honestly, for purposes of this particular tape, I'm going to stop scraping that and move on to the fuel pump. So, I actually have to use a
Good old-fashioned ratchet.
wrench because I can't get my handy-dandy air ratchet in there. Bummer. Can't use this. This. Okay, the gasket came clean off the engine surface, and it's sitting here on the surface of the fuel pump.
And this is made of paper?
Actually,
Or is it disintegrated?
no. What I did was I used, and again, I'm sure people looking at this film have deposed people who say they've used Forma gasket, which is a You run a bead of gasketing material and you squeeze it onto the block, and it forms a gasket, hence the name Formagasket. Well, I used Formagasket on this. Sorry, folks. And
so this is a liquid gasket material that...
Yeah, it's a liquid gasketing material, and when you cinch it up, it basically seals the two surfaces. And that's what I used. So, hey, I was a kid in college. I didn't have a lot of money. So, what do you expect?
Is the liquid gasketing material considered a superior or inferior product?
Inferior.
Okay.
Don't use it if you've got a gasket.
Gotcha.
But, again, if you're a starving college student, which I was at the time I replaced that fuel pump,
does the job?
Sometimes you resort to any means necessary. Okay, let's move on. That was easy. And actually, I could use Formagasket on the oil pan had I wanted to. I've seen it done before. It does a perfectly serviceable job. But whenever it was I replaced that oil pan, like I said, that was about the time I replaced in fact, I know it was when I replaced the timing chain on this engine. I obviously had an oil pan gasket and a timing cover gasket to replace it with, as opposed to using Formagasket or some cheap stuff like that. The technical name for Formagasket, by the way, is RTV, room temperature vulcanizing silicone, which is, like I said, pretty handy stuff. You know, use it when you're in a pinch, but it's no substitute for a proper gasket. I don't care what anybody says.
Did the liquid gasket material ever have asbestos in it?
Not that I'm aware of.
Nope.
And if it did, it wouldn't be friable. Okay. Jim, I hope you caught that gasket falling off on your camera.
I think that's it. Yeah.
Oh. Okay, once again, boys and girls, embossed metal for the oil filter adapter. Again, this is the oil filter, Ram, good brand. This is the oil filter adapter, which attaches to the engine block, and in this case, there is an embossed metal gasket that goes there. On Ford cars, don't know if it was OEM or not, on Ford cars I have seen either paper or vellum type gaskets in its place. But in this particular car, and again, that is OEM, that's original equipment, there's an embossed metal gasket. Just wipe the surfaces off a little bit. Try not to let any contaminants get in there because that's where the oil goes. In fact, what I'll do is just tear this rag in half.
Stuff it for now?
Stuff it in the hole for the time being. That way, if any dust blows up and anything like that, hopefully it won't get inside. Let's see if I can get this neoprene front gasket off the oil pan. And again, we're talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple 100,000 miles on this gasket. Which again is neoprene.
Did you break the blade?
I broke my blade, darn me. Yeah, stuff happens. Et voila, one piece. Neoprene, rubber, very resilient. That goes in the front of the timing cover, and there's one just like it on the back here. Darn, this is too. Oh well. I'll get to that one because I got to move on to the water pump. The water pump, like the oil pan, has two different size bolts holding it on. Let me move the engine forward so you can see. So, socket. Get this one off. Let's see. Every engine manufacturer has its little quirky designs. One of the quirky things about Oldsmobile is they use two different size bolts to secure their water pump. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. Double check, make sure I've removed them all. Should have been 8. Boom. Okay. No gasket on that surface. So we got gasketing material on the surface of the water pump. And just judging by some of the deposits in there, this water pump was probably on its last legs. Like I say, about every 80,000 miles and I had to replace a water pump on this. But that's what's called the impeller when I'm spinning around there, and that's what circulates the water through your engine block and hence cools your engine. When your water pump wears out, what will happen is there's a bearing inside of there, and the bearing will start to disintegrate, and before the bearing fully disintegrates and all the bearing material gets inside your engine block and wreaks havoc, what the designers of these water pumps have done is they very cleverly drilled a little hole in the bottom of the water pump. So when the bearing starts to go, you'll get little dribbles of engine coolant and you'll see little spots of green on your garage floor. So that is your clue that your water pump's about to go. Replace it before the bearing completely disintegrates and then completely disintegrates your engine block. So that's why they put it there. It's a warning. So look at your garage. You see little green puddles. Check out the water pump. See if it's not time to change it. Okay, let's see how easily this gasket comes off. And again, this is either paper or vegetable fiber. I'll use what's left of my knife. Hopefully get it off cleanly. And Jim, are you going to be able to...
Zoom is great. Zoom is my friend.
Zoom works?
Zoom works.
Great.
So this is made of paper or neoprene?
Best guess, what I'm looking at right now is paper.
Okay. And basically the water, when it goes through at this stage, is basically cold or ambient?
Well, when the engine's running, water is usually going through your motor at anywhere from, say, 180 to 240 degrees, give or take.
Okay.
So, as you can see, this is coming off in pieces. No surprise there.
Yeah. To your knowledge, did any water pump gaskets ever contain asbestos?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I again get back to my original premise that head gaskets, exhaust manifold gaskets, sometimes intake manifold gaskets, and exhaust donut gaskets are primarily those that contain asbestos. Now, at one time, I can't remember if it was McCord or Victor, it was one of those two brands. They were marketing something called asbestoprene. By its name, you might gather that it was a mixture of neoprene and asbestos. I have never seen asbestoprene anywhere in practice, and the only place I have seen the name is in advertisements way back when. But when working as a mechanic, and yes, I've installed McCord gaskets and Feltro gaskets and some Victor gaskets, although Victor wasn't very popular in the neck of the woods where I worked. I never saw the asbestoprene name for any valve covers or any other gaskets that are normally just simply neoprene in nature. So that came off very cleanly. I'm very pleased. But yeah, this water pump is on its last legs, and so I'm just as glad I pulled it off. So that takes care of that. And the only thing left for me to do, which I'm going to do sometime later, is clean the rest of the surface on for this oil pan. And in the meantime, I'm going to put the oil pan back on the engine just so it protects it from any dust blowing and things of that nature. And I'll do this some other time. When I have more time on my hands. Anyway, there you go, folks.
Any last words?
No, I was hoping you'd have a question that I could answer for you, Jim. But,
No, I think...
I try and anticipate all these questions, but I usually leave that up to my Auto 101 class, because as I start talking, questions start coming on, but it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about that. Yes, great question. But anyway, thank you very much. That's all.